Welcome everybody to this Artist Entrepreneur Day of Sessions here at English Cooke Expo. I'm going to explain who I am, then I'm going to introduce a couple of people, and then I'm going to explain how the sessions that are happening today are going to work. For those of you who are planning to stick around for all of them, but also what's happening in the next hour for those of you who are just here for the first session. So let me explain who I am. This is me. My name is Cooke.com is my website. It's where you can check me out online if you so wish. And I am the founder and the managing director of a company called CMU. So we help people to navigate and understand the music business, and we do that in a number of different ways. We are journalists. We write about the music business every day of the week. So we have our website and our daily bulletin that people can sign up to. So we help people understand what's happening in music through our media, through our publications, and through our journalism. We also do lots of training courses about the business of music. We have our own online masterclasses. We run training courses for various organisations around the world. We do in-house training for like Sony Music and for various management companies. We do lots of research on trends in the business around streaming and rights and licensing. And at the moment, everyone just wants to talk about AI. Maybe we'll go the whole day about mentioning AI. Let's see. I've got to ruin it by mentioning it. We're also involved in lots of events. So that's what basically what CMU does. CompleteMusicUpdate.com is our website. And we work with lots of organisations in the music industry, and one of those is the Featured Artists Coalition. So the Featured Artists Coalition, or the FAC for short, is the UK organisations for artists who are up front on stage building businesses and audiences around their music, which is very much the topic of today. How do artists go about building a business around themselves and their music and their creativity and their performance? And those are the artists that make up the FAC. And so the FAC is an organisation that brings everybody together to share ideas and to share knowledge and also to campaign together. I am going to mention AI. One thing you'll notice at the moment around the whole debate around AI is that the biggest record companies in the world, the biggest film studios in the world, the biggest book publishers and newspaper organisations in the world, the biggest TV companies in the world are all currently standing up for human creativity. And they want copyright law to be protected so that those bad tech companies don't steal everybody's music and literature and photography and build machines that can render everyone out of work. That's the current narrative. Now, on one level, that's great. I think we all agree. We don't want Google to make another $100 billion by stealing all the musicians' music. We agree on that point. But if Sony Music does a deal with Google, and if the Universal Film Company does a deal with Google, and if the UK newspaper company does a deal with Google around AI, do we trust them to then share that money with the artists and the actors and the journalists? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. So organisations like FAC are very much part of that conversation, saying, oh, hang on a second, if what we're interested in here is the human creators, let's hear from the human creators. So that's one of the roles that the FAC plays. So at CMU, we work very closely with the FAC, and on one of the projects that we work with FAC on is this Artist Entrepreneur Programme, running sessions like this in various places around the country, and sometimes beyond. And as I say, with this programme, it's all about the business side of being an artist. Within FAC, there's lots of conversations about the art of music making, and all the tools that are out there to help create music, and do all the visuals around music. So FAC is not always about the business, but these sessions are very much about building a business around you and your music. And so for this session, and the sessions throughout the afternoon, I am joined by two artist entrepreneurs, two artists who are in the process of building a business and an audience around the music that they are making. So basically, throughout the day, I'll be doing some presentations, some CMU DIY guides. We've got some industry guests coming in to talk about what they do and how they work with artists. But we're also going to be hearing at each stage from our artist entrepreneurs about their case studies, their experiences, whether it's around rights, whether it's around live music, whether it's around building a fan base, reaching out to media, whether it's about choosing what distributors to work with, and when's the right time to get a management company involved. So these are all conversations we're going to have. So I'm going to ask our two artists to quickly introduce themselves. So maybe Ellen, if you just want to quickly stand up and just give us a 60-second who you are, the kind of music you're making, and where you are in your career as an artist.
Cool. Hello everyone. I'm Elizabeth Abdi. I am a Mancunian artist, born and bred, still here after 28 years. And I make wonky soul-infused pop, that's my tagline. I've just released my debut single after about 10 years in the music business, and I'm releasing my debut album on the 23rd of May. I've currently work with a manager, and I've got a distribution deal for the label, but I'm self-releasing. So that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. Just very quickly tell us, with you 10 years in the business of music, but you're just putting out your first single now.
Yeah.
So what other projects have been on the go over that decade?
I've been in loads of bands. I was in a lot of bands doing a lot of festival circuits. I am in A Certain Ratio, which is like an old school Manchester band, used to be signed to Factory Records, and I've performed with various old school Manchester bands and then various offshoots. And so I've kind of played like dive bars, I've played really big stadiums, I've done a lot of gigging and a lot of recording sessions, and I see that as kind of the prep that I needed before I was releasing my own music and had the confidence to do that, so yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And then our second last observer state is Ria, so maybe do the same, give us a quick introduction of you, your music, and where you are in your career.
Hi everybody, I'm Ria. I'm a singer-songwriter and producer, and I've been making music for about 7-8 years now. Currently distributing with AWOL. The sound is very much pop with a little bit of my influences. You'll always hear a bit of Bollywood and maybe a little bit of opera. I'm classically trained, so I have a diploma in classical singing. And it's really exciting now to be able to merge those worlds when I'm creating new music. So I'm excited to do it. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we'll be hearing from Ellen and Ria throughout the day and digging into their projects, their releases, their shows, etc., etc. In terms of how the day is going to work, we've split it up into 4 sections. Each one is approximately an hour, well, 45 minutes, because we'll take some breaks along the way. So for the first strand, we're looking at the copyright side of being an artist. How do you make money and protect your songs and your recordings? Then, in the second hour, we're going to delve on the live side, and we're going to look at how the live side of being an artist works and how you get opportunities to play live, the business partners you may or may not choose to work with along the way, and maybe we'll find out how Ellen took those experiences working within bands and then transformed it into your own headline show of what you learned along the way and how it compared. Then, between 2 and 3, we're going to have a look at the idea of finding an audience for your music. Because, you know, however good your music is, if you don't have an audience, it's really hard for us to make money. So you know, you need an audience in order to get people streaming your music, you need an audience to get people coming to your shows. But once we've got an audience, once we're building a fan base online, what can we be doing with that audience to basically find other ways of making money? And then in the final hour, we're going to be looking at the music industry. Now, obviously, we're looking at the music industry throughout all of this, because I think it's always important to remember that at the very heart of certainly the music business, of every artist company, every single artist who's a frontline artist is also an entrepreneur running a company. And those companies are what sit at the heart of the music industry. And indeed, you know, if you're a songwriter or a producer or a musician behind the scenes, you're still running a company. You know, the very, very few musicians are employed by anybody. They are running their own business, and you might be behind the scenes and you're selling your creative skills and talent to other artists and to studios and to film companies and arts companies, or you're a frontline artist and you're trying to build an audience and a brand and monetize that audience. And those artist companies sit at the heart of the music industry, and that's our big focus throughout the day. However, artist businesses then form partnerships with other businesses to access support, infrastructure, marketing, and sometimes money. And we'll talk a little bit about who those business partners are. We'll be name-checking them throughout the day. We'll be talking about labels and distributors and agents and promoters and managers. But in the final hour, we'll really drill down into, well, what is it that these people do? How might you work with those people in the future? Do you want to? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And if you do want to work with these business partners in the future, what do they want in return? What might you have to give up in terms of rights and revenues in order to access that support? So this is the sort of running order of the day. We'll take some breaks along the path as well. There'll also be lots of opportunities to ask questions. So while I'm presenting, my presentations, most of them are in 5 stages. 5-step guide to music copyright, 5-step guide to live, 5-step guide to building a fan base. At the end of each of those steps, I'm happy to take questions, although I am wary I've got to stick to schedule. So hopefully we'll have time to answer your questions. And when we're looking at live, we're going to have a guest promoter and a guest agent joining us, and you're welcome to ask them questions as well. And in the final hour, we're being joined by a label, by a publisher, and by a manager who can all talk about what they do, and you're welcome to ask questions of all of them. The slides I'm presenting to you, you can have at various points at the end of each section. I'll give you a link where you can go to the CMU library website and download the slides if they are useful. Does that all make sense so far? Is everybody following us? Okay, so let's get going with our first focus, which is making money out of songs and recordings. So, as I've sort of alluded to at various points, what we're interested in today really is what I call the frontline artist, or what the record industry traditionally called the featured artist, hence the Featured Artists Coalition. Were you all aware what the term featured artist meant? It doesn't mean guest artists, which you'd be forgiven for thinking that it did. You'd think, what's a featured artist? Well, if you've got artist X featuring artist Y, surely artist Y is the featured artist. It would make sense, wouldn't it? That's not what featured artist means. It's a record industry term, and it kind of comes from the CD vinyl era, because it was the artist who was featured on the cover of the record. That was the featured artist, hence the Featured Artists Coalition. I prefer the term frontline artist. It's the artist who is up front on stage, building a business and a brand and an audience around their music. Of course, frontline artists are part of the wider music making community. There are the people in the studio, backing vocalists, session musicians, there are people fully focused on the songwriting and the composition, or the lyrics, there are the beat makers, and there are all the sort of producers and engineers in the studio. They all together are the music making community. But the people we're particularly interested in today are what we call the frontline artists, or to use the old-fashioned term, featured artists. And we are, as I said earlier, interested today not in the art of music making. I mean, my guests here could tell you all about the art of music making. Unfortunately, I can't. So I'm not here to tell you about the art of music making. I don't know anything about the art of music making. What I do know is how you make money out of music. And if we look at how frontline artists make money, there are three main ways that frontline artists turn what they do into revenue. And then their businesses are structured around those three main revenue streams. And so the first one we're going to be talking about is the intellectual property revenue streams. So this is the one that's quite complicated. The basic principles are really simple, but it gets quite complicated quite quickly. So we get it out of the way first. Okay, so I might fry your brain in the first 20 minutes. It gets easier after we stop talking about intellectual property. Live performance is obviously the other big revenue stream for many artists, a lot easier to understand. But there is a third area as well, which is this idea of a fan relationship. You build a relationship with your audience and your fan base, and then you find other ways to generate income by giving those fans an enhanced experience of you and your music and your creativity. So these are the three main ways that frontline artists make money. Now, some artists who are frontline artists are also working behind the scenes at the studio. They're also on tour with other artists in their bands. So just because you're a frontline artist doesn't mean that you're not also behind the scenes doing session and studio work. So that could still be an important revenue stream for frontline artists. Obviously, a lot of artists also have a sideline in education. A lot of artists teach other people about performing. So some frontline artists will have a whole other side to what they do in the world of education. And some people who are frontline artists also, for example, might run a festival or put on a gig night, or they might do some social media and PR for other artists on the side. So there are other projects that frontline artists may have that bring in income, but the big revenue streams that we're interested in today are IP, live, and the fan relationship, and you'll notice that's basically the schedule. IP first, then live, then the fan relationship. Any questions on our revenue streams before we delve into my very fast 20-minute guide to music copyright? Does that all make sense so far? Okay, so what we're interested in this first session is how you to make money from your songs and your recordings. So a quick show of hands. Who here is a songwriter or composer? You can use whatever terms you like. Who here is composing music right now? So most of you in the room are songwriters. Okay, and who here is a recording artist? You're involved in making recorded music. Okay, so pretty much everybody in the room is a copyright owner. Because in every song you have ever written, there is a copyright. And in every recording you have ever made, there is a copyright. So you are now a copyright owner. So what is copyright? So let's get into my CMU guide to music copyright. I'm going to tell you the 5 key facts you need to know about music copyright. And it is my mission in life to make every artist as excited about these 5 copyright facts as I am. Okay, because these 5 facts are how you make money from your songs and recordings. And if you don't understand these 5 facts, there's a very high chance you're going to lose money. There's a very high chance if you don't get on top of these 5 facts, somebody else will make money from your music and you won't get paid. So it's really important to understand these facts. But before we get into that, let's just have a very quick definition of what this thing called copyright is. So there are various different kinds of intellectual property, but when we talk about music rights, we're usually talking about this thing called copyright. So this is my definition of copyright. So slightly oddly, I own the copyright in this definition of copyright. I wrote it. Copyright is a legal concept which provides creators, that's you, with certain controls over the outputs of their creativity, which can then be exploited for profit. So copyright is a legal concept that exists in most countries around the world, and it basically says if you create something, you have control over what happens to the something. Why? Well, maybe because it's the right thing to do, but also because, as it says there, you can then take those controls and make money from them. So in some ways, it's a reward for your creativity, for your creative passion, talent, and time in creating the piece of work that you have put out into the world. Now, we're interested in music copyright, and when we talk about music copyright, fact number one that everyone needs to get their head around is that there are two different kinds of music copyright. When we talk about music rights, we're talking about two different things. Because copyright protects songs, but it also protects recordings. And as far as copyright law is concerned, these are two different things. First of all, what do I mean by song? Any combination of rhythm, melody, lyrics, that is what I am calling a song. Now, there may not be lyrics. It may be a piece of instrumental music, and you might not think of that as a song. A piece of classical music, or a piece of dance music, or indeed, or there's folk music where there are no words. So if it's just a composition, I'm still calling it a song for this definition. Any combination of rhythm, lyrics, and melody, that is a song, and that is protected by copyright. But crucially, if you write a song on Monday, and then you go into the studio and you record a version of the song on Tuesday, you have created two separate copyrights. There's a copyright in the song that you wrote on Monday, and there's a separate copyright in the recording that you made on Tuesday. And that's really important. Terminology. In the music industry, we quite often call the song rights the publishing rights. So if you hear people talk about publishing rights, they just mean the copyright for the song. And we sometimes still refer to the recording rights as the master rights. If you hear people talk about master rights, they just mean the copyright in the sound recording. And because copyright law treats songs and recordings separately, so does the music industry. So we have two strands of the music industry, both involved in copyright. The publishing sector is focused on the song, and the record industry is focused on the recording. Now, as we saw from the show of hands, most artists today both write and record music. So not all, some predominantly or exclusively write, and some predominantly or exclusively record. But I would say most artists are doing both. So most artists are involved in both copyrights. The companies that work with artists on their copyrights very often have two divisions. Publishing division doing songs, and a label division, or recordings division doing recordings. So the three biggest record companies in the world are Sony, Universal, and Warner, and the three biggest music publishers in the world are Sony, Universal, and Warner. But even though you are all creating both sets of rights, and the companies that do copyright are involved in both sets of rights, we still treat them separately. We organise them separately, we manage them separately, we license them separately, the money flows through different channels. So it's really important to get your head around the fact that there are two different copyrights and two different strands of the industry, publishing focused on the song and the record industry on the recordings. Any questions on the two copyrights? Yes?
What's rights admin?
Rights admin basically is doing the administration around the rights. So, although songwriters here who are unpublished, okay, and are you a PRS member? Okay, and do you go into PRS to log your works? Do you find that a really tedious, boring process?
I love it.
That's rights admin. So, can we find someone else to do all of that? Now, PRS is the collecting society. I'll talk about this as a member in the UK. There's an equivalent of PRS in every country in the world. And if you want to actually get every single penny you are due for your music, you need your data not just in the PRS database, you need it in the SACEM database in France, and you need it in the GAMER database in Germany, and you need it in the ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMI, you need all the databases in the US. And so a good rights administrator isn't just going into the PRS database, they're going into all the databases around the world. And we call that rights admin. So that's what that service is. Spreadsheets, basically. Any other questions on the two copyrights? Okay. So, I said that copyright gives creators, in this case music makers, control over what happens to their content, in this case to their music. What does that mean? Copyright law actually defines this idea of control in more detail. And it says if you own the copyright in a song, or you own the copyright in a recording, you have control over your work in a number of different ways. And there are 6, arguably 7, controls available to you as copyright owners, sometimes referred to as the exclusive rights, or technically the restricted acts. But forget about that, let's just call them the controls that come with the copyright. So as a copyright owner, you have control over the copying of your music, the reproduction of your music, the true right to copy. But you also have control over the distribution and rental of any copies that have been made. You have control over the adaptation. So if I had to take your song and I was to change the lyrics, or if I was to put a string section in the middle, then whoever owns the copyright for the original song has control over that. So if you want to take somebody else's song and change it, you need their permission because they have control over the adaptation of the work. You have control over the performance, that's the public performance of the work. You have control over the communication of the work, which basically means broadcast, if the music is played on the radio or TV, or basic webcasting online. And the making available is to do with on-demand interactive online delivery of content. So Spotify is a making available, Netflix is a making available, because the content is being made available online in an interactive way. It's not just a straight webcast like a radio station, but online, there's some sort of interactivity involved. Technically, making available is a subset of communication, hence why I've laid it out like this. It's not just the symmetry of the slide. But there are 7 ways that you have control over your music because of copyright. Quick terminology point, in the music industry, we quite often group the first 2 together, and we call them the mechanical rights. So if you ever come across the term mechanical rights, that's what they're talking about, the reproduction and distribution controls combined. The bottom 2, performance and communication, we quite often group those together, and here's a confusing thing. Songwriters and publishers call these the performing rights, artists and labels call them the neighbouring rights, because why agree on a term? Even more confusing, in continental Europe, the term neighbouring rights usually has a different definition. So when people talk about neighbouring rights, the first thing to say is, well, which definition are you using? But if people talk about neighbouring rights in the UK, they almost certainly mean this. They mean the performance and communication controls of the sound recording copyright. What songwriters and publishers refer to in the context of the song as performing rights. Any questions on the controls? You look like you had a question.
So this is in reference to either the song or the
Correct.
recording.
Correct.
Within each of those, you've then got these.
Correct.
So mechanical rights can refer to the song rights or the recording rights.
Technically, yes.
But
But,
it's
good point.
mainly
Because it's a music publishing term that originates in the 19th century, when we have pianos that could play themselves, publishers aren't very good at coming up with new terminology. We only really use it in the context of the song. So when people talk about mechanical rights, they're almost certainly talking about the reproduction and distribution controls of the song copyright. The recording has the controls, it's just we wouldn't generally use the term mechanical rights. It's a good point, because it's a music publishing term, a term that publishers use. So when people talk about mechanical rights, they almost certainly mean the reproduction and distribution controls of the song copyright.
And it comes from mechanical pianos, or is that?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's why we call it mechanical rights.
Interesting.
Sorry, could you go through neighboring rights again?
Yeah.
And the
So,
definition in different.
The UK definition
Yeah.
is the performance and communication controls of the sound recording copyright. So what, as a songwriter, we talk about performing rights. It means the same thing, it's just used in the context of the sound recording rather than the song. Now in continental Europe it has a different definition. So under French copyright law, the whole sound recording copyright is the neighbouring right. So if you're in France and they talk about neighbouring rights, they probably mean the sound recording. Because it's the song is the author right and the recording is the neighbouring right. So that on the French law, that's the definition they tend to use. In the UK, we never use that definition. In the UK, when we talk about neighbouring rights, we mean the performance. So if a recording is performed, so how is a recording performed? If I was to play a recording through these speakers, that would be a performance of the recording. If I was to play the recording on the radio, that would be a communication of the recording. And those two things together are what we're calling the neighbouring rights.
In the
In the I mean, to be honest with you, because the UK and the US use that definition, it's starting to be employed across the world. But yes, certainly when I'm in continental Europe and people talk about neighbouring rights, my first question is, what definition are you using? Which neighbouring rights are you talking about? Yeah. So the basic principle of copyright is this. If somebody wants to stream your music, so if Spotify wants to have your music streaming on the Spotify app, when music streams, the music is made available, plus there's a copy, because it's made available on Spotify's server, and then when the track moves from Spotify's server to your phone, a copy occurs. If we sell a CD, when we copy the CD, we press the CD, that's a reproduction, and then when we send the CD to Amazon, or to HMV, or to an independent record shop, that's a distribution. So both reproduction and distribution. If music is played on the radio, it's a communication. If music is played live, it's a performance. If music is put into a TV show, there's a copy that is actually inserted into the program, and then every time the program broadcasts, it's a communication. And if we remix a track, there's an adaptation, because we're taking the original song and we're messing with it in the remix, and then every time the remix is pushed out, there's a reproduction. So in all of these scenarios, if a third party is using somebody else's music, because of copyright, they have to get permission. They have to go to the copyright owner and ask for permission. So,
Quick question.
yes.
Could you go back to the slide? Yes. When you say rental, does that mean licensing?
When I
It's
say
not
rental,
here, but the one from before.
oh, no, so rental,
Is that licensing?
well, it's all licensing. No, so rental is think of physical product. So in the movie industry, for 30 years, one of the biggest revenue streams was renting DVDs, and that was exploiting the rental part of the copyright. Libraries also exploit the rental part of the copyright. And that was why, if those of you who are old enough to remember renting DVDs and videos, I couldn't just buy a DVD at HMV and then start renting it out to my friends. Because rental is a different part of the copyright. So in order to rent it out to my friends, I'd have to get another license to cover the rental. In the music industry, rental has never been a big deal. Libraries have CDs and vinyl, and they're exploiting the rental rights, and there's a little bit of money flows through the collective licensing system as a result, but it's a really small thing.
An adaptation is covering?
It's where you're changing, not just covering, changing.
Like a sampling?
A sample would be an adaptation. So would be translating lyrics. So would be, if I took your song and I put a whole string section in the middle, those would all count as an adaptation. And in doing so, you're creating a derivative work. You're creating a new copyright, which is rooted in your...
Like rearranging in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah. Okay. So, if you want to do any of these things with somebody else's music, you have to get permission. And so, a third party exploits the music, they have to get permission from the copyright owner, and that's what we call licensing. Licensing is simply the copyright owner allowing somebody else to do one of the things, or multiple of the things, with the music. If you want to copy my music, if you want to perform my music, if you want to communicate my music, you need my permission. And so we're going to negotiate a deal, and that will be a licensing deal, and I will give you a license that allows you to use my music, subject to whatever we agree. Maybe you pay me £1 million, maybe you pay me £1. It will depend on the deal, okay? But permission is needed. Of course, the question is, who is actually granting that permission? Is it the artist? Is it the songwriter? Usually it's not. Usually somebody else is actually granting the permission, negotiating the deal, and collecting the money. But before we get into that, any questions on the controls? Right, let's talk about business partners. We're going to talk more about this later. But, as an artist, you're recording music, so you're creating recording copyrights. And we can make money from those. As a songwriter, you're creating songs, song copyrights, we can make money from those. But, in most scenarios, as an artist, as a songwriter, you are not actually granting permission to anybody who wants to use your music. You are looking for business partners who can help you with that process. Now, because the music industry treats songs and recordings separately, you're going to need one set of business partners for your song and another set of business partners for your recordings. It's different parts of the industry. As a starting point, let's go back to collective licensing. We alluded to this earlier. For many artists and songwriters, your first business partner when it comes to copyright is going to be what I call collecting societies. They're sometimes called collecting management organisations, CMOs, performing rights organisations, PROs, music licensing companies. Why have one term when you can have four? I'm going to call them collecting societies. So for a lot of artists, the first business partner is going to be a collecting society. But remember, recordings and songs are separate. So in the UK, every country has its own collecting society, societies, plural. In the UK, PRS is a society you're going to join around your songs. They represent the song copyright. So you're going to join PRS, is one of the first things as a songwriter you're going to do. As a recording artist, you're going to join PPL. PPL is the Society for Recordings. Who here is a PRS member? Okay, who here is a PPL member? Okay. Who's here as a member of society elsewhere in the world? Okay. So, in various scenarios, the music industry licenses as one. So rather than every artist, every songwriter, and every label and publisher negotiating their own deal, the industry says in these scenarios, we'll license together through one organisation, and that's the collecting society. So PPL, radio, we license as one, PPL issues the license. TV, we license as one, PPL issues the licenses. If pubs, clubs, bars, cafes use recorded music, we license as one, PPL issues the license. So as an artist and a label, you join PPL and then it does the deal, collects the money, and in theory pays it back to you. On the song side, whenever music is performed or broadcast or communicated in any way, collective licensing applies. And that's what PRS is handling. So if music is performed live, PRS. If music is played on the radio, PRS. If music is played on TV, PRS. If music is played through a sound system in a public space, PRS. PRS is issuing the license in all of those scenarios, collecting the money and passing it back. What's the little M blob there? Does anyone know what the little M blob is? That's MCPS. There is a third collecting society in the UK called MCPS. So MCPS issues licenses when the mechanical rights in songs are exploited. Do you remember that term from 5 minutes ago? So PRS issues the license when the performing rights are exploited. And PRS issues the license nearly always. There are some exceptions, but nearly always, if the performing rights are exploited, PRS is going to issue the license. MCPS issues the license sometimes when the mechanical rights are exploited. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. The members decide. But MCPS main business until relatively recently was physical product. If a record label releases a CD or vinyl, but they've got other people's songs on there, so the artist and the label together control the sound recordings, but they don't necessarily control the song copyrights, so they need a mechanical rights license so they can reproduce and distribute the songs. So they go to MCPS and they get a mechanical rights license. So in the CD era, that was MCPS's main business. But MCPS is also involved in TV and it's also involved in streaming. Yes?
Is that like compilations then?
Any release.
Anything?
Any release. Because if I sign you to my label and we do a deal around your recordings and then we release a record, as a label, well, I've only got a deal with you around your recordings. We don't have a deal around your songs. Now, you might have then done a deal with a completely different company, a publisher, around your songs. So I'm involved in your recordings, but you signed to Warner for your songs. So, having said that, there may be co-writers on the record who are signed to Beggars, or they're signed to BMG. So suddenly, as a label, this is getting quite complicated. Because I've got to sort out a license for all of those different songs. Much easier to go to MCPS and get a single license. Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, MCPS doesn't even have a website. So how are we supposed to?
Like absorbed into PRS.
So MCPS is owned by the music publishers, who then hire PRS to do all the work. So MCPS basically is administered by PRS. So it's the same website, it's the same database, it's the same call center. So actually, as a customer, if I'm a customer of music, I almost don't need to know the difference. I go to the PRS website, I buy a license, I pay the money, I don't care. But as a copyright owner, you do need to know the difference. Because if you're not an MCPS member, you're a PRS member, but you're not an MCPS member. If ever there is mechanical rights income, they can't pay it to you. And for example, because TV is both, because TV is a reproduction on when the music syncs, and then it's a communication when the thing goes out. if the BBC go into the database and see you're not an MCPS member, they probably won't use your music. Because they're like, I don't know how to get licensed for that, so I'm just not going to use it. For some songwriters, there's probably no mechanical writing income anyway. But there may well be some money out there. Now, if you were published, your publisher would already be a member of MCPS and you would sit under your publisher's membership. So the minute you're published, it doesn't matter. The publisher will sort it out. But until you're published, you probably should look into joining MCPS.
Okay, so we would ring up PRS.
Well, you should go to their website.
And then,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. When you joined PRS, there would have been an option to also join MCPS.
Okay.
You tick some boxes,
Yeah.
but it would have been another £100. So that's probably why you didn't do it. Okay, so as an artist, you should join PPL, assuming you're in the UK. Free to join, although I had a conversation earlier that the admin's quite hard work, but at least you don't have to pay any money. PRS is £100 to join, one-off joining fee, unless you're young, in which case I think it's £30 or something. It's cheaper if you're under 25. MCPS is £100 to join. If you're a band, every individual has to join separately. Okay, bands can't join, every individual has to join. So if you're a band of 5, suddenly it's £500 to join PRS, and it's £500 to join MCPS. Now, the societies collect money in those scenarios I outlined. On the song side, actually, between them, PRS and MCPS collect in nearly every scenario. Not all, but nearly every scenario. On the recorded side, PPL are only collecting TV, radio, and pubs, clubs, bars, cafes. So on the recording side, if you're putting out recorded music, you need, at the very least, a music distributor to get your music into Spotify, and Apple, and Deezer, and YouTube, and TikTok, and Instagram, so your music is on those platforms and it's making money when you get streamed. So at the very least, you need to find a business partner that will do that for you. Now, there are music distributors I call DIY distributors who will basically work with any artist who pays them. So anybody can find a distributor, and you usually pay an upfront fee, 50 quid per release, or whatever it is, and if you get any streams, they will pass all the money, 100% of the money on to you. So anybody can get a distributor. But there are what we call higher level distributors, who usually don't charge you an upfront fee, but take a commission, 10%, 20%, 30% of the money once it starts to flow. And the higher level distributor doesn't just get your music into Spotify, they pitch it to Spotify. They don't just get your music into TikTok and YouTube, they help you create content that will get you some traction on TikTok and YouTube. So there are the basic level distributors who will work with anybody, and then there are the higher level distributors who are choosy who they work with. And they might be choosy on an A&R basis, do they like your music? Or they might be choosy on a commercial basis, can we make any money? So most people start with a DIY distributor and then they move up to a higher level distributor, or you can sign for a record label. And once you've got a label, they do all the distribution for you and a load of other stuff as well. On the song side, you can have a rights administrator to help you get your data into the system and to pull the money out of the collective licensing system worldwide, or you sign with a music publisher who do all the admin for you and a load of other stuff as well. Now, with the collecting societies, they basically are not-for-profit organisations that charge admin fees on the money as it flows through. With the distributors and labels and publishers, they take over the management of your rights, and they may provide other services. In the case of a label and publisher, they might throw loads of other services in, and in return, they take a chunk of the money. And they might take 10%, they might take 90%. It depends on the deal. Okay, so you need to decide what you're willing to give up. They might also want to actually control your rights. They might want to own your rights. And these are all things you need to consider when you go into business with these companies. Yeah?
Just a very quick question on the previous slide with PPL and MCPS. Am I right in thinking for MCPS, if you are doing a performance on live television,
Yeah.
and that gets reproduced, say on BBC iPlayer
Yeah.
or another streaming service, that would get you a mechanical
Correct.
royalty.
Yeah.
And so you know when you register, say, so I performed at Henley Stadium, and you have to, on PRS's side, because I'm 100% owner of
Yeah.
mechanical and publishing, if I perform live, I register with PRS and for the live
Yeah.
to collect for the songwriters
Yeah.
and for the performer. And then on PPL side, so long as I've got the song registered with PPL,
Recording registered, Yeah.
recording, sorry, my mistake, yes, recording registered with PPL. There's no like submission that I need to be doing on PPL.
No, so we'll come back to this later actually. With live music, you're advised to tell PRS that you did the gig.
Really?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
of course.
Because unless somebody at the gig came and asked you for a set list, nobody on the venue or the promoter is telling PRS about the gig. And have you ever been asked for a set list? So make sure you tell PRS. When it comes to broadcast, radio and TV, the bigger broadcasters and radio companies, they're meant to tell PRS and PPL what music they used. So the radio stations and TV companies provide PRS and PPL with a load of data for everyone. Now, whether or not that data is any good, that's a big debate. And so if you had a publisher and a label, one of the things they might be doing is going in behind the scenes to check the data. Or at the very least, what a label and publisher might do is they might say, we know you were on the BBC in February, we would expect to see some income in October, so we're going to check the statement, and if we don't see that money, we're going to go and shout at people and get the money. Now, you, A, don't have time to do that, and B, you don't even necessarily have the contacts to do it. So this is where labels and publishers will say, this is one of the things we're bringing to the table. In theory of collective licensing, you put all the data in the database, the money should just flow. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And on the days it doesn't, that's where having a publisher, a rights administrator chasing that money and having a label, or you can have a neighbouring rights agency changing the money, you might not get that money. But then they're going to take a cut of that money. So you then have to make a decision as to whether or not you're willing to give up 20% of the money in order to access that support.
And would you recommend, because I do a lot of work and I do a lot of performances live on BBC Radio, Manchester and London, is that something that you can actually register as a performance?
No.
In PRS? It's not,
No.
right? Is that only a live performance?
Correct.
In front of
Correct.
an audience?
So all you could do is, if you knew you got a lot of airplay in February, you then need to figure out when you should expect to see that payment, because it won't be March, it will be later in the year. And then you look at your PRS statements, like, I didn't get any money. And then you could phone up PRS and say, I was on the BBC, they would have reported, if they, of all of them, the BBC are going to be best at reporting, they would have reported, where's my money? Okay, let's speed on, nearly done. Although this is the most important thing. Who owns copyright? So the first thing to say about copyright is an automatic right. As soon as you write a song, there's a copyright in that song. As soon as you record a track, there's a copyright in that track. You do not need to register your copyrights. In some countries you can, but it's voluntary. You don't have to. And in the UK you can't. There's no copyright registry. You couldn't register them even if you wanted to, because copyright registration does not exist. So as soon as the work is created, the copyright exists. So how do we know who the copyright owner is? Well, the law tells us. The law says whoever wrote the song owns the copyright. The law calls that person the author, which isn't very helpful because I don't think you think of yourselves as authors, but legally you are. For the recording, the rule differs from country to country, but in the UK, the rule is whoever organises the recording session owns the copyright in the recording. Okay, and we take that to mean pays for it. Now, obviously, this rule was written, the last major update of the UK copyright law was 1988. So this is from an era where nearly every recording began in a studio. So someone had to book the studio, and whoever booked the studio owned the copyright. Obviously, we're now in an era where, well, even an iPhone is now a studio, let alone a laptop. So in an era where your house is your studio, and you might be collaborating with people in other countries, that rule becomes very tricky. So, really important point, never rely on these rules. Whenever we create music, we need to agree with all of our collaborators what copyrights have we created and who owns them. So we're never relying on these rules. Now, the next thing to say is that copyright can be co-owned, because when it comes to songwriting, lots of songwriters collaborate. And if you collaborate on a song, you create a single copyright that you then share. So between you, you own the copyright. Now, how you share it, that's up to you. So you need to agree. 3 of us are owning this copyright and we're splitting it equally. Or one person's getting 60% and the other 2 are getting 20% each. You need to decide how you're going to split it. You need to agree it. You need to write it down. Now, it can be a single one-pager. It could be an exchange of emails. There are apps you can use which help you agree this. Or you can pay a lawyer to write a contract. It's entirely up to you. But it needs to be written down. And you need to tell the music industry what you decided. And you do that by filling out the databases of PRS and PPL. So PPL manages the UK industry's recordings database. PRS manages the UK industry's songs database. So for the industry to know your music exists, you need to log it, and you need to log what you agreed. There were 4 of us on the song, we're co-owning the copyright, and this is how we're splitting it. So agree it, document it, and log it. And the music industry has a long history of being really rubbish at this. And whenever you see someone on social media saying, I've got 100 million streams on Spotify, and I earned £50, that cannot be true. And almost certainly the reason that they have only earned £50 is because they screwed this up. And the system doesn't know who owns the copyright. And the money's sitting somewhere waiting to be collected. And with the exception of the US, if you don't collect the money after a certain number of years, it just gets distributed across the industry.
This is the black box.
The black box. So they sit on the money for a period of time, and then they say, don't know what to do with this money, so we'll just, we gave Sony 20% of all the money that flowed through PRS last year, so we'll give Sony 20% of this black box of money we don't know what to do with it. So the money ends up with the big publishers and the superstars. So we need to agree, I've been shocked by this, you need to agree how you're splitting the copyright, you need to make sure it's written down, and you need to get it into the databases to make sure you get paid. Yes?
You know how there's obviously the song versus the recording
Yeah.
side of this? Is it, I know it's very typical when you go into a room, if you co-write a song and publishing is just
Yeah.
with whoever's in
Yeah.
there. On the recording side, is it usual to split?
No.
Right? Okay.
So, very quickly, that just recaps what I just said. Document what you've agreed and tell the industry. The next slide comes to your point. You can have co-ownership of the copyright. And so if I own 33% of the copyright, whenever that copyright makes money, I get 33% of the money. Or a single entity could own the copyright. Now that could be an individual or it could be a company. And that single entity could then say to their collaborators, I own the copyright, I'm going to make money out of this copyright, but once the money starts coming in, I will share the money with you. And that person then has a royalty right connected to the work. So you're right, when it comes in the music industry, by convention, on the publishing side, each songwriter gets their cut, they then do a deal with a publisher and they all get their splits. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be that one person takes the copyright. You could agree this. This is how Bob Dylan used to do it. When Bob Dylan collaborated, the deal was, I'm commissioning you as a co-writer, I'm going to own the copyright. You can have 30-40% of the money, but it's my copyright. So that's how Dylan did it. So you can do that, but that's the exception rather than none. Generally on the song side, we split it, everyone gets their share, everyone gets their money. Whereas on the recording side, it is much more common for one entity to own the copyright, which will either be the main artist or their label. So either the artist or the label. And then either the artist or label will then say, well, if it's a label, they'll then say to the artist, but when the money starts coming in, we'll share it with you. And we'll pay you 20%, 60%, 42%, it doesn't matter, you agreed in the deal. You could have a co-owned recording, there's no reason why you shouldn't. You could have it that 3 different people own the copyright, and you log it to PPL in that way. You can have co-owned recordings, but generally you don't. Generally, either the main artist or the label owns the copyright.
Where does the producer sit in this?
Well, it depends what we mean by the producer. If it's the producer in the studio, behind the sound desk, they would usually have a royalty right. So you'd say to the producer, we pay you an upfront fee, you don't get a cut of the copyright, but we'll give you a royalty. Now, with a classic studio producer royalty, it's so low, we use the word points instead of percent. So we'll say you get 3 points on the recording. It means you get 3% of the money. But 3 points sounds better than 3%, doesn't it? So the producer will be getting 3%. Now, crucially, if I'm a label and I sign an artist and I'm paying 20% or 25%, let's do a slightly better deal. If I'm a label and I sign you and I pay you 25%, and then we agree to pay the producer 3%, his 3% is coming out of your 25%. So you're now getting 22%. Because there's 25% for the creatives. So if we give the producer 3%, that's coming out of yours. So we now have a guest artist doing some guest vocals, and we offer them 8% in return for their guest vocals, that's coming out of your 20% or 25%. But this is all to be agreed in contract. This isn't copyright law, this is what you agree in contract. In sort of hip-hop, grime, drill, where it's the producer does the beat and then the rapper raps on top, it's much more likely to be a 50-50 split. Then it's like, well, is it a 50-50 copyright split, or is it that one artist owns the copyright but the other person has a 50% royalty right? And And again, all of this is to be agreed. Yeah.
Is there any way of like logging that so that's automatic through the systems, or do you have to just sort of send them that money yourself?
Oh, right.
With the
Good point.
royalty,
So, obviously, if you're signed to a label, it's the label's problem. But you're right. If you are in essence the owner of the copyright, and then you say to your guest artist, "I'll pay you 25%," it's now your responsibility to do that. Now, some of the DIY distributors have tools to help you do it. So, with some of the DIY distributors, you put your recording in, and then you say, "Oh, I've got a guest artist who has 25% of the money." So, whenever any money comes in, you don't pay that to me. You pay that directly to the other person.
Right.
So the DIY distributors, not all of them, but a lot of them now will help with that. But if you then did a sync deal with a movie company, and they paid you £10,000 using music and movie, it would be your job to then pay the £2,500 to the writer. Yeah. And obviously artists have always moaned about labels being really bad at this. And now we're in an era where artists are labels. So now artists are moaning about other artists rather than labels. The question here, and then we'll come to you.
What's the benefit of being a single copyright owner when you're splitting the money that's coming in anyways?
The reason why this is mentioned in the record industry is until relatively recently, record labels wanted to own the copyright. So until certainly the mid-2000s, it was generally assumed the record label was going to own the copyright for as long as the copyright existed. So I'm the label, I own the copyright, single copyright owner. I might then commit to share some of the money with the artist, but I want to be the copyright owner. I guess because we're now in an era where it's more common for the artist to own the copyright, but the convention has been set, there's usually a single copyright owner.
You mean for the sound recording or for the song?
For the sound recording.
Okay.
The song splits or...
So there's no such thing as single copyright owner for the songs, just for the recording?
There could be, but industry convention says no. So by convention in the industry, as I say, Bob Dylan did do it that way, but generally with songs, everyone takes their split, everyone licenses their portion, they get their money. That's the vast majority of scenarios, that's what's happening on the song. Whereas on the recording, it's more likely to be a single owner. Now, the other answer to your question is, if, this can happen on either side. Let's say I help you out, and you're very generous, and you give me 5% of the song and 5% of the recording, of the actual copyright, not a royalty right, you give me 5% of the copyright. And then, Sony Pictures want to use your music in their film. And they come to you to do a sync license. But you now can only license 95% of the copyright, because I own 5%. So you do a deal of 10 grand for your 95%. And then they come to me and I say, I want 10 grand for my 5%. And they say, screw it, we're not doing the deal. You've now lost the deal. There's nothing you can do about it, because I own 5%. Whereas, if I had a 5% royalty, you would do the deal, and then you'd pay me my 5%. So I guess, in a way, if you can own the copyright outright, you're in a stronger position, as a general rule. Yes?
What happens if, so say if you perform that song live, say if I have a set and I'm performing for 30,000 people, so obviously I will get an amount and you provide a checklist of doing music.
Yeah.
Song list.
Yeah.
If it was a situation where the producer and say the artist is also taking a split of the master, i.e. the recording, is it then your responsibility to distribute the proportion of the earning from the live section as well, or would that happen because there's...
On the recordings, if it's ever flown through a collecting society, the collecting society will sort it out.
But I would be obliged, say if I'm getting an upfront fee for performing at that festival.
Oh, that's
nothing to do with...
That's nothing to do with the copyright.
Okay.
So if you perform live, even though you're performing your own songs, the fee you negotiate with the promoter is just for what happens on stage.
Got it.
There's no copyright in that deal, and actually I'll come back to that later. Okay, last copyright facts. Oh, any copyright facts? Any questions on all of that? Or I get the last fact. Fact number 5. Performers have their own rights in a sound recording even when they don't own the copyright. So we talked earlier about how it's quite common in the record industry for there to be a single copyright owner, either the label or the main artist. Most of the other, well, if the label owns it, no artists have a cut of the copyright, and if the main artist owns it, then the session musicians, the backing vocalists, the guest artists, they're not being cut into the copyright. And actually, generally with session musicians and backing vocalists, they don't even have a royalty right. They're paid a fee for their time, and then that's it. So, there are lots of performers involved in recordings who are not involved in the copyright in that recording. However, performers have their own rights, performer rights. First of all, performers have approval rights. So, if I want to record an artist's performance, I have to get their permission, first of all, to make the recording, that's what fixation refers to, and also to exploit the copyright. So I need to get in writing from the artist, you are giving me your permission in terms of the £200 I'm paying you to make a recording of your performance and to then reproduce, distribute, rent the resulting recording. So I need to get that in writing. Now, if a label's involved, it's the label's problem to do that. But if the artist is doing it all themselves, if you have other musicians in the studio with you, I foresee this becoming a big legal problem in the next decade, because it's kind of only in the last 20 years that artists have been taking the lead in all this, and I suspect a lot of artists are not getting their session musicians to sign the pieces of paper. Because if you don't get the artist to sign a piece of paper, technically, you can't release the recording, because performers have approval rights in law. So, this might be you are the session musician, in which case they have to get your approval. But if you're the main artist and you're bringing session musicians in, you need to get that permission in writing in order to make the recording and exploit the copyright. But probably the more important performer right is the ER right, which is short for equitable remuneration. Copyright law says, in certain very specific scenarios, basically when the neighbouring rights are exploited, so remember that's the performance and communication controls of the sound recording, so in practical terms, radio, TV, pubs, clubs, bars, cafes. In those scenarios, every performer on the track has a right to payment in law. It's not to do with any deal you did with the artist or with the label, it's a right in law. In fact, I could sign you, I could bring you in as a session musician and have a piece of paper that says you have no right to equitable remuneration, and the law would say, don't care what your contract says. This is an unwaivable right in law. So whenever these elements of the copyright make money, every performer on the track has to be paid. And they are paid at industry standard rates. And this is all managed by PPL, because PPL is already issuing the licensing in scenarios anyway. So whenever money flows through PPL, the money is split 50-50. Half of it goes to whoever owns the copyright, which will either be a label or an artist, the main artist, and then the other half is shared out between all the artists on the track. So the main artist also gets a chunk of that other half, and then the session musicians get their share as well. So half will go. Now, if you are 100% self-releasing, you're the only artist on the track, then you're getting all that money. You're getting the half of the money with your copyright owner hat on, and you're getting your half of the money with the performer hat on. But if you're signed to a label, the label gets the copyright owner half. If there's session musicians involved, a chunk of the performer half will be going to the session musicians. Providing somebody tells PPL that the recording exists and all the performers who are on the recording. Because PPL is managing this in the UK, and then PPL's counterparts all around the world. And those are the 5 facts you all need to know about music copyright. We will take a very quick break, but you can get, hang on, actually, do you know what, we're going to come back to that.